Here we are. Watch what you say. All right. The recording is started. Oop. Here is everyone. There we are, showing everyone who's here. And now we will watch the ceiling.
You can prompt it so they can see you the whole time.
Yeah, they don't want to see me the whole time. They spent all summer looking at me. Okay, Luke 5:1. This is the part of Luke where he talks about, well, in my Bible, the heading says the first disciples. And you have to understand, this is going to talk about the calling of the first four that he called into permanent discipleship with him. Later on, become named as apostles. Understand that if you just read through here without knowing what the other gospels say, you will think that he just randomly walked up and called these people to follow him, and they kind of, like in a trance or something, walked off with that. John's gospel, which talks about Jesus' really first part of his ministry, which was down around where John the Baptist had been baptizing. John makes it clear that Peter and Andrew and John already knew Jesus, and they had already been introduced to him John and Andrew were introduced to him by John the Baptist. Andrew went and got Peter and introduced him. He also, Philip and Nathaniel were also there at that area. So they were already following him in a sense. They had already been introduced to him, and Andrew certainly had formed the belief that Jesus was the Messiah, and that's how he introduced him to Peter. And so they knew him, they knew kind of his nature, they had seen some miracles that he had done, but they hadn't committed themselves to a full-time discipleship. And we will see as Luke 5 begins, we will see them going back to their vocation as fishermen, commercial fishermen. And so anyway, this is where he comes to them and says, okay, it's time to not be part this and part that. You're going to become my full-time disciples. But the way he did it was that he approached them in a way that went where they were, because they were fishermen. That was their job. That's what they knew, and they had a pretty good little operation going, as we can see if we read the scriptures. But it's time for them to no longer be that, no longer be partly this and partly that, but to become all of Jesus' disciples. Someone read verse 1 and 2 of chapter 5.
One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets.
Okay. Now, here's an issue, or people make it an issue. Matthew and Mark have the call here as well. Now, in Matthew and Mark, Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee, and he sees these boats out there and the fishermen fishing in the boats. Now, Luke says he was standing by the lake, and a big crowd was there. And Luke has the boats pulled up to the edge of the lake. The fishermen are no longer fishing, but they're washing their nets. And some people have said, "Well, this is a contradiction. The Bible contradicts itself." Other people said, "No, they make two episodes out of this. They make he calls them at one time one here, and he calls them another time there." I'm not a theologian, an amateur one at best, but I am a lawyer, and I am a litigator. And for quite a long time, part of my job is always to take different witness statements and read them together to a coherent picture of what actually happened. That's what a trial is supposed to be. And if you look at Matthew and Mark's version, and if you look at Luke's version, they're not really contradictory, especially if you know how the fishermen went out to fish. They would go out into the Sea of Galilee, and they would have either two kinds of nets. They would have a net that they just kind of threw over the side. That's more like shallow water. But in the deep water, they had two boats. And they would have a seine stretching from one boat to the other, and they would call it in. It was sometimes called a dragnet. And that's how they would fish. Now, understand that the time to fish was at night. That's when the fish were closest to the top. That's when they were more likely to bite. I mean, I remember that even from when I was a kid. We'd go fishing, and
Water calmer too.
we'd go night. The water's calmer. At night we would go. Fishing time was really good if a storm was coming up. The low pressure, something about the way that, anyway, so they did it at night.
Fish half asleep.
The fish are half asleep. When they would get the fish at night, then when the sun started coming up, they would come to shore, and they would wash their nets and dry them, because all of the gunk that collected on the nets would otherwise, they would quickly rot. And so the washing of the nets and the drying them was intended to preserve the net. Okay, so in Matthew and Mark, Jesus is walking along the shore of Galilee. He sees them out there and they're fishing. By the time we get to Luke 5, some time has elapsed. And during that time, two things have happened. The fishermen have come to shore, and they are now washing their nets. The sun is now up. Also, Jesus has drawn a crowd. Because remember, this was in the first year of his ministry. This is the beginning of the Great Galilean ministry. His popularity is probably at the highest point it will ever be. And wherever he goes, people are looking for him. Matter of fact, in Luke 4, verse 42, it says the crowds were searching for him. They came to him and tried to keep him from leaving them. I mean, it was like he was just a people magnet at this point in time. So he's walking along the shore. He sees them out there fishing. They come in and they start doing their net thing, and at the same time a crowd is gathering. So I don't see a contradiction. I see if you read them together, this is how it went down. So he's standing there, sees these boats. The crowd, literally the Greek is the crowd was pressing him. He was getting to the point, he's at the shore of this lake, and they're coming in, and you can't do anything in a situation like that. So he has an idea. verse 3 says he got into one of the boats which belonged to Simon, whom he already knew. They knew each other. And asked him to put out a little from the land. Then he sat down and was teaching the crowds from the boat. Sat down is sitting is the posture of the teacher of that day. So he gets away from the crowd, basically, so he can be seen and heard. And people who claim to know say that the acoustics are really good if you're on the water and things of that nature. But he just had to get back from them so that he wouldn't be pushed into the sea, and they could hear him. So he's teaching. Simon is accommodating him here. And a long time ago, I saw one of these movies about the life of Jesus, and they show this scene, and it's kind of funny in a way. He's sitting there, and the boat's just kind of bobbing up and down while he's teaching the crowd. But I think probably it was pretty calm, pretty still at that time of day. So he teaches them.
Can I say something
Yes.
about the lake? If you ever go to the beaches or you go to the lake, the water making noise, kind of not rough. But when you're talking to the person who's already in the water, then you have to repeat yourself several times. But when the person from the water call you the first time, you can hear that clearly because it carries out your voice to the shore. But
Yeah.
when you are at the shore, you can hear it better. But when you're standing in the water, you cannot hear that much because all the commotion of the water and things.
So it has something to do with the acoustics.
So experiment, anybody go to beach and lake, do that, somebody in the water, ask him something, you can say, what? But the other person, you can hear him clearly from the water.
Okay. So what was he teaching them? Well, it doesn't say, but we know what his theme was. We've seen the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain, if you want to call it that. The various things that he taught, he was teaching about the kingdom, and he was teaching about God, and he was speaking to them the Word of God. And then he finished. Someone read verse 4.
When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put into the deep water and let down your net for the catch.
Okay. He's done with speaking. The crowd presumably is dispersing. And Jesus turns to Simon and says, okay, let's go out again. I want you to put down your nets for a catch. Bad idea, right? This is not the time of day that you do that. It just isn't done because long experience is that this is not the time, it won't work. And here is a carpenter turned rabbi telling a professional fisherman what to do. Now, I don't know if anybody else is like this, but I meet people all the time that think they're lawyers. And they will tell me what the law is or what everything like that. And the human side of you gets a little irritated when somebody who is not in your profession, in your wheelhouse, comes and tells you something about that. But Jesus is doing this. Well, we know why he's doing it, but it's interesting to me that he's going to touch these people, and he's going to make them his followers, but he approaches them through the medium of the particular thing that they work at. And the message here is kind of like, I realize this is your area, but everything is my area. And so he says, put out to deep water and let down your nets for a catch. Well, look at Peter's response. Peter has a natural response. Somebody read verse 5.
And when Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net.
See, that reflects again that nighttime was the time for fishing. And it had been a hard night, and it had been a disappointing night. And Peter was, or Simon, as he's called here, was probably already a little irritated because this is his job. This is his profession. This is how he makes his money. This is how he feeds his family.
And the net wasn't dry yet.
And that wasn't even tried yet. And so, number one, he's already probably a little irritated. Number two, here is a carpenter turned rabbi telling him to go out and catch fish. Number three, nothing's happened. But at your word, I'll let down the nets. This is an act of obedience from a man who doesn't understand why he's being asked to do it. This is a pattern for us all. If we have clear command from Christ, if we have leadership from God, we know God is asking us to do something, telling us to do something. We do it.
Besides a miracle, what other lesson is in that?
Well, the lessons in that is that God doesn't always tell us why He's having us to do something. If, hopefully, if after we do it, we'll get some insight, but maybe not. But even if we don't know this side of heaven, He calls Him Master, which is the word meaning someone in authority. And so He already recognizes Jesus Christ as a person who is to be obeyed. And this doesn't make a lick of sense to Him. It's a lot of trouble to get that rig out there and go at it again. He's already done it and it hasn't worked. He's going against everything that Peter knows as to how to catch fish. But at your word, we'll do it.
And he's tired. He wants to go home.
He's
Wash
tired.
the
You know
nets.
what I mean?
Everything is clean.
Yeah,
He stayed
that's what I
awake
say.
all night. He's done night shift.
Yeah, it's a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just, to do this, it wasn't just, oh, okay, well, I'll go out and do it. No, you had to get the boat, you had to push them back out in there, you had to get the nets, who were already clean, and it looks like it's going to be a long morning. But read verse 6.
When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break.
You see, he's not only the master of Peter, he's the master of the fish. And they go out there and they put the net down. And I was watching, have any of you ever seen the series called The Chosen? It's pretty good. They give, I must be tolerant in my old age, they give backstories to the disciples. And it's not 100% accurate in all the detail, but it's accurate in the heart of the thing. And it's episode, 6 or whatever, 8. They show this scene. And Peter's in the boat and everything, and he's like looking at Jesus who's standing there, and Jesus is going, eh. But the acting is the best part of this. The guy that plays Jesus you've never seen anybody play Jesus like this. But Peter's in the boat and he's sitting there going, okay, we're out here, and all of a sudden the book's like that. Fish. Never seen before. They get out there in obedience to Jesus, and Jesus has every fish in that part of the lake come and jump in their nets. The fish didn't know what they were doing.
Catch me.
He just, get in there. Okay, so let's get in there. And the whole thing is such a mass of fish that their nets began to tear. In other words, their nets were pulling apart. It was so much. So, verse 7, so they signal to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. Because they had two boats, so this was it. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. It was the weight of the fish was so heavy that they were going down in the water, and you know, at some point the water's going to start coming in over the gunwale, and they barely made it back to shore in that condition. Well, what is Peter to conclude? What is Simon to conclude? He realizes that he's just seen a miracle. He realizes this could not possibly in any way, shape, or form be a natural event. He knows that Jesus did it. And he realizes that he is in the presence of deity. And in verse 8, it says, Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees. This word, fall, fell at his knees. He fell forward. That's what that. Okay, I'm taking notes on the Greek word. He fell forward. He just prostrated himself at his feet, and this word can also mean shove against. So this was not a calm fall. He did a face plant at the feet of Jesus. And his request is interesting. You wouldn't think about it. You wouldn't think somebody would say this. Go away from me, because I'm a sinful man. What's up with that? I heard one commentator said, you would think he would say, come with me. We'll have fish so we can do anymore. But he says, go away from me.
I think he's thinking of doing, with Jewish religion, they always had an intermediary. It was always the priest between God and the other people. And I just felt like I am not worthy to be in your presence. There needs to be a priest there.
Okay.
I think the magnifying that the miracle happened and he was part of it, he just beyond ever he saw anything like that. As knowing there's no possibility getting fish, now we have loaded with the fish, and coming in there has to be beyond human power to able to do that. So putting himself against him, he said, just get away, because I am not gonna be able to be following you probably. I'm not the person, and you know, you wanna select me or wanna be with me.
I think he was afraid of God's power, kind of like what Michael was saying this morning.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus could be scary. It's a funny thing. There are people especially in this area in which we live, there have been people who claimed to have had a vision of God, or Jesus appeared to be, and things like that. And they some of them just make it sound very casual. But if you look in the Bible, you will see that people who come into God's presence are struck with a sense of their own sinfulness in comparison with the holiness of God. They see what God is, they look at themselves and says, I'm not, do an Isaiah thing. I've had it. Oy me. I'm undone. And if you really think about in yourself, not just having a vision or anything like that, but when you find yourself more focused on God, and when you are those times when you're closer to Him in a way, you start to see your own sin in more detail. And that's what's going on here. Is that Peter realizes that himself, he knows himself, he knows his own faults, he knows what he is, he realizes that he is a sinful man. And he realizes that this is somebody here who is not. And somebody here who has God's power. And he just did not feel, he went from being, oh, this guy's being annoying, he's wanting me to do things I don't want to be, to the fact that this is somebody I'm afraid of. And Jesus recognizes that. Says he was amazed at the catch of fish they took, and so were James and John, Zebedee's sons, who were Simon's partners. But look, Jesus says to him, stop being afraid. Again. Jesus, I'm not here to hurt you. Do not be afraid. Stop reacting like this. I don't want to go away from you. I want you to come with me. Don't be afraid, Jesus told Simon. From now on, you'll be catching people. You have been catching fish. I want to change your vocation. And this Greek word, which means catch people, the word catch, is a compound word, and the first word in that compound word is zoe, life. It refers to catching something alive. See, they caught the fish so the fish would die. I mean, they would be eaten. But he says, I want you to start live catching. And what I want you to start live catching is live catching people. And from now on. Then they brought the boats to land, left everything, and followed him. Peter, Andrew, his brother, James, and John, the sons of Zebedee.
It's no longer about fish anymore.
It's no longer about fish anymore. And they, Mark says, they left the fish in the boats with Zebedee and the hired men. Don't let that pass, because we sometimes think these dudes out in the boat and that's all there is. This was a commercial fishing operation. They had two boats. They would have been larger boats. Zebedee was there. They had a partnership going on, and they had employees. These weren't people who were following Jesus because they had nothing better to do. These were people who left their commercial fishing operation and became full-time disciples. They said they followed him. Follow in Greek means to take the same road. He goes down the road, you go with him. So here is the first full-time calling of disciples. Now the text in your quarterly jumps past the middle of chapter 5 and next goes to verse 27 of chapter 5 because there's somebody else going to be called.
Makes you wonder who got the ships.
Well, Zebedee was there.
Yeah.
He was there. He had his hired people. He was kind of
Oh, that partnership.
left with all that. I mean, it would have taken, can you imagine how long it would take to process all those fish? Anyway, so he was busy. But in verse 27, after this, there were some things that went on. Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, "Follow me." Okay. I probably have gone through this before, but the Romans, they tended to rule through local people. And really, the Romans, you could stay off their bad side if you, number one, kept the peace, and number two, paid your taxes. And the way the Romans collected taxes, they didn't have an IRS, they didn't have a bureaucracy to go out and make sure everybody did. They engaged in a practice that has been called tax farming. They would farm out. They would have a contract with a local person. And this local person would have a contract with Rome that you collect our taxes, we'll back you up, you remit the certain portion to Rome, and then anything over and above that you can keep. There were two classes of tax collectors. One was a type of tax collector that the taxes he did were pretty set, scheduled. But then there was the other kind, and the Jews called them the mochus. And the mochus was one who collected taxes on like excise and transactions and things like that. And they were a little more loosey-goosey as to how much he collected. And so the mochus, if he squeezed people enough, could make a good deal of money off of that portion of them that he didn't have to remit back to the Romans. Now, the funny thing about it is that the mochus that had the contract with Rome, they were usually somebody in society that they didn't want to get their hands dirty. So they would subcontract the actual collection out to other people. Now, the contractor that had the deal with Rome, he was called the Great Mochus. And his subcontractor would be the Little Mochus.
Sounds like a mafia.
Well, except that it was legal under the laws of that day. But they said, go out and get the taxes. We'll back you up. Anybody gets you in trouble, call the soldiers. We'll take care of them. And so anyway, Matthew, or Levi, as he's called in Luke, is the Little Mochus of Capernaum. Now, you have a guy that's bought into this arrangement. He has made the decision that for the material advantages that it gives him, he has forfeited the respect of his people. He has become a collaborator with the oppressing overlords. He's working for the Gentiles, God forbid. And he is an outcast from Jewish society. And he has deliberately made that choice. And he's at his job, just like the fishermen were at their job, taking taxes. There was a road that ran along the Sea of Galilee, and there was a lot of traffic, and he would be taking taxes. And Jesus comes up to him and says, "Follow me." And he leaves everything behind. He got up and began to follow him. Now, did he know who Jesus was? Who didn't know who Jesus was? Everybody knew who Jesus was. And he had probably seen Jesus, and maybe he had even heard Jesus speak.
Probably part of the crowd listening to sermon.
But why did he do what he did?
This is my observation.
Did,
He knew from Jewish stand, he has no chance, he's outcast.
Right.
And knowing Jesus came for sick. When he said, I'm not here for the healthy, I'm for sick. And the way he was listening many times on his gathering, he knew that his real thing is the Messiah.
Yeah.
He knew a knowledge of Jewish, he knew that was the Messiah. So when he comes into his booth and asks him, follow me, his heart is ready just for that command to receive.
Yeah.
Spirit.
The Spirit was with him,
Spirit touched him
touched him,
and
and I think he was,
opened his eyes, his heart.
yeah. And I think he was ready. I mean, I see a guy here that's just sick of it.
That too.
And he
You know?
witnessed some of the miracles too.
He's seen what's going on. He's heard about Jesus. He's seen him, perhaps listened to him. He realizes that if God likes anybody, it's not going to be him. He sees what he's become. And Jesus comes by and says, follow me. And he doesn't even close the door behind him. He was ready. But look at these people that Jesus has for his disciples. The fishermen, they're unqualified. The tax collector, he's disqualified. You know, and these are the various people that Jesus is calling to follow him. Now, they don't know what they're in for. He didn't tell Peter, Simon, come, follow me, and you'll end up upside down on a cross someday. He didn't know what he was in for. But he didn't know what he was in for when Jesus told him to push out and let down his nets either. He didn't know what was going to happen. Well, he thought he knew what was going to happen, but he didn't. And so these people who are unqualified or disqualified, they have one thing in common, and that is they had a heart that was ready to obey, regardless of their background. They had hearts that were ready to obey, and Jesus is going to kind of underline this whole thing by what happens next. After Levi follows him, Levi hosted a grand banquet for him at his house. He did the only thing he knew to do to show that he had changed. A grand banquet. The Greek, it was a mega banquet at his house. Now, who's going to come to a tax collector's banquet? Other tax collectors. He's not going to get the Pharisees to come. He's not going to get the good people of Capernaum to come to his house. They wouldn't. They wouldn't do that. And there were a large collection of tax collectors and others, other outcasts, you might say, who would guess. Now, banquets like this in that society were public affairs. People would come just to gawk. And in the crowd here, there are some of the righteous people. Verse 30. The Pharisees and their scribes were complaining to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Big reason why Jesus was rejected by the religious establishment was because he didn't meet their expectations. And this is a prime example. You were supposed to stay away. You were supposed to show your disapproval. You were not supposed to come around. You certainly were not supposed to eat with them because that is a communal type of thing. The Pharisees invented virtue signaling. The Pharisees invented shaming, virtue shaming. You know what that is. As somebody gets on the line and says, you know, somebody does something they don't like, and they get on there and they rip them off, you know, just to show how virtuous I am. The Pharisees invented that. They were masters of that. They invented antisocial distancing.
was gonna
They
mix it
stayed
with-
away.
I was gonna mix it with the politics, Maxie Warren, go outside and shame those people.
Go outside and shame those people. They were experts at this, and they got away with it. And here they come to the disciples. Why do you eat and drink with the tax collectors and sinners? Well, the disciples don't know. They're fishermen. They're a tax collector.
And they just joined.
They just joined. I mean, what are you after me for? And all of a sudden, here's Jesus. I love this. He's not going to let the Pharisees pick on his guys. He's going to answer them. And his answer is, the healthy don't need a doctor, but the sick do. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Now, the irony of this comment is that the Pharisees were sinners too, but they didn't admit it. And so basically what he's saying is, my message, and he says this throughout the Gospels, my message is for people who know that they have nothing to offer me. My message is not for people who think they're okay. Because I can't help people who think they don't need me. But these tax collectors and sinners came at the invitation of a man who knew that he needed Jesus. And the first thing he does after he meets Jesus is call other people together so they can meet him too. And this is the context in which Jesus can really, really work. The Pharisees, buckets of cold water, that's all they are. They're there because they want to show how righteous they are and how stinky everybody else is. And he says, you don't need me? I'll go to the people that do. So this is his disciples, and that's basically the end of our lesson text. He chooses some people who are unlikely candidates. And he's been doing that for 2,000 years. And he does it today. Some of my mother used to say, you can't tell the luck of a lousy calf. You don't know how somebody is going to end up. There's some people who go into prison as criminals and come out as preachers.
Yes.
There's people who are qualified by nothing, according to the world, but have accomplished things far, far beyond any natural talent or natural ability, because they simply decided to do what God told them to do. And he turned the power on. So that's the lesson here, is that don't underestimate yourself. If you have a heart to obey God, don't underestimate what he can do through you. And don't underestimate other people. That's all I've got to say about this passage. Is there any other comments or anything we
What
missed?
kind of tax collector was Zacchaeus?
Well, he was probably the same class. He was just in Jericho, and Levi was in Capernaum. They had these guys all over the place because they had to. It takes a lot of money to keep an empire running, especially if they waste as much of it as they did. It was interesting. I was looking at the words. The word for tax. If I can check with my notes, the word for tax meant something along the lines of money paid at the end.
Money what?
Paid at the end.
Paid at the end.
Oh,
It's like, I guess it's when the transaction is over with, then you gotta pay the tax guy. But, yeah, so these guys, I mean, they knew the job was hard when they took it, and they made the decision to trade their respectability for money. And they were hated roundly.
sure.
Levi was a tax collector. Another one of Jesus' disciples was Simon the Zealot. The Zealots killed tax collectors. So, you know, those two guys must have had some interesting conversations. All right, I'm going to turn
Thank you, sir.
off